Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. Of the many Marvel comics to bear an X in the title, X-Men Unlimited largely focused on self-contained stories, each about 50 pages. Today, I'm taking issue with X-Men Unlimited number 4, and a revelation that we already saw in this season's Valentine's Day episode. Let's see if this comic rendition of Nightcrawler's family tree makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads. Most covers have the title restrained to a certain portion while a scene plays out. This one has the title splayed out vertically, our key players at the forefront, Kurt hanging off the E, Mystique brandishing a gun, and Rogue with crazy exaggerated 90s hair in the front, and no pupils. Maybe she bumped into Storm with those uncharacteristically rolled up sleeves. Perhaps this atypical approach was meant to be part of the draw. In its own uncomplicated way, it does stand out. Written by Scott Lobdell with art by Richard Bennett, Steve Moncuse, and Glynis Oliver, we begin with a gun pointed at a man in the middle of an angry yawn. This is not the first time General Armand Gaudier has stared death in the face. It is, however, the first time Death has stared back. Death was trying to find a tasteful way to say he had a booger sticking out of his nose without the phrase, "You could hang a parka on that thing." Theories of Relativity. Sounds like the name of a middling sitcom by Chuck Lorre that I wouldn't find even remotely funny. He's held at bay by Mystique, who, as seen in this reflection, looks away from him for some reason. I know she's armed and stepping on his torso, but she mentions his 3-decade military career. Feels like someone you'd want to keep an eye on. He may not have done anything to her specifically, but has provided weapons to the Friends of Humanity in their anti-mutant war. As anyone who knows me will tell you, I don't even treat my friends very well.
No wonder no one came to my birthday party.
Armin says word's gotten around that Raven Darkholm was posing as DARPA's deputy director, a cover which is now done for. It's of little consequence to the shapeshifter, who morphs and then shoves the gun further into his face, like she's about to shoot him as Abraham Lincoln.
It's just like Carol said the old gypsy woman said!
Yet Raven isn't interested in defending fellow mutants. This has to do with Graydon Creed hiring Sabretooth to kill her, in the latter's solo mini I reviewed in my first season. Since Gaudier decided to ally with him, Mystique grabs a power cord, saying he's going to send Creed a message. After killing him off-panel, she leaves posing as an armored guard, or Halo cosplayer, who jokes to the sergeant at the idea of a crazed mutant breaking in to kill the general, which the Sarge laughs about. Good to see security at this facility doesn't take their security jobs very seriously. One of them is a supervillain in disguise. What's the other guy's excuse? After the head-smashing, possible broken arm, and implied strangulation, the papers report that Gaudier died of a massive coronie, likely a typo for coronary. Graydon Creed reads about this while living in the south of France, specifically the lavish mansion owned by his young girlfriend's royal dad. But the girl doesn't care about a dead warmonger. Creed's sources say he was murdered to get his attention. I spent the better part of the last 5 years of my life cultivating a relationship with that particular warmonger, Lorette. I told him I loved his weapons, but the truth is, I was in love with his weapons. The resident butler brings in Gunther Reinhold, who was hired to confirm Mystique is indeed Graydon's mother. But he reveals there's also a brother. He'll tell him who for more money, lest word get out. So the bigot attacks with a broken wine bottle. This loosens the guy's tongue, Graydon promising to have his injuries treated for a name, which becomes a lie when it's whispered to him, as, in rage and disbelief, he cuts Gunther's throat with a decorative birdcage stand. I bet Maury Povich is glad he passed on him for a guest. Lorette tries kicking him out for this, but Gracie has a thing about being tossed away, grabs her and says he'll leave on his terms. She yields and he's taking off, believing there's a connection between Gaudier's death and this brother. Let's hope this young woman remembers she can easily afford new locks on the doors and some armed security by the time he gets back. Better yet, guards with mutant powers. Kurt Wagner has taken a commercial flight to Washington, D.C. at the behest of Forge, mutant liaison for the State Department. Using his image inducer while walking through the airport, he sees a father being aggressive to his family, eventually smacking his son. So Wagner teleports Dad outside and way up high. In his normal form, he figures Pappy, dangling so far above the ground, must feel the same fear and helplessness as his son, and says the parent-child relationship is very important. Can you believe they fired him from that teaching job at the Learning Annex? He returns to the terminal, his image inducer back up, and the father is desperately apologizing to his boy, and even tearing up. There are a few logistical issues here, namely that no one seems to bat an eye that these two just disappeared for a minute or two. Even if they only saw Kurt's inducer guys, someone would think he's a mutant and confront him about it. But what can I say? I'm a sucker for abusive jackwagons getting the fear of God put into them. And given that Crawler is so religious, that may be very literal. Kurt knows this probably won't solve the family's problems, but instilling the light of hope in the child will prove a strong foundation. Oh, and that stuff I mentioned about how someone had to have seen the whole thing? Rogue agrees, as she's standing right there in a come over and see me sometime pose. Stanley Fraulein Liebe! Considering Stan Lee's status at Marvel, using his real name like this in an X-Men comic almost feels like the equivalent of using God's name in vain, only probably less sinful. Note how Kurt stutters at seeing her, almost like he's about to go all Tex Avery Wolf, eyes popping out and such. Probably because she caught him using his powers recklessly, but he kisses her hand, so there's a borderline flirtatious element there. Certainly dash of Luke and Leia vibes. Later they attend Gaudier's funeral at Arlington, per Forge's request, and spot Graydon Creed in attendance. Rogue mentions having only seen him in media, but finds something familiar about this guy. The priest's eulogy leans into the general as a racist arms dealer and traitor to the American people, then kicks over the coffin, revealing the body wired with explosives.
Can't one dinner go by where we don't talk about your rotting corpse?
Sorry.
Holding a detonator and revealed as Mystique, she says that 3 months back, Gaudier supplied the Friends of Humanity with a bomb that killed 17 people in Chicago, none of whom had any connections to mutants, but the mere perception was motive enough. She tries implicating Creed, though he interrupts her, and Rogue flies in to grab the casket when the detonator is pressed. After the explosion, safely away from civilians, several, I'm going to say soldiers, open fire on Raven, who goes evasive. This could not have worked out any better if I planned it, which of course I did. Uh-huh? That line doesn't really make any sense. Maybe it sounded good in the writer's head at the time, but it just reads more nonsensical than I think was intended. She saw Rogue in the crowd and knew she'd inadvertently help her escape, but also that she typically doesn't work alone. Kurt confronts her and gah! What the freaking expletive! I usually avoid taking things out of context salaciously, but jeez! She's squatting down and her expression is not helped by her son crouched behind her. That statue of the Virgin Mary and Infant Jesus is likely meant to hint at their relationship, but it doesn't distract from the yikes of this panel, which I hope was unintentional. Anyway, yeesh. Darkholme says this wasn't a suicide mission for politics, but to take out Graydon for the aforementioned hit on her. Crawler's presence must mean he knew this was a family matter, but he has no idea what she's talking about. She punches him against a tombstone that reminds him of when she met him as an adult that he should have asked his adoptive mother why the two looked so much alike, but apparently he never did. Since they're still being shot at, she tells him to come home if he wants answers, and to ask Rogue where that is. She takes off, shape-shifting into the crowd, though in this panel it looks like she stopped to do some yoga. She'd better hope she finds her center before a gunman's bullet does. Gunfire starts targeting Kurt, hiding behind a gravestone, thinking he's Raven's accomplice, and he's unsure where to bamf to without endangering bystanders. Good thing Rogue swoops in for the rescue. I know she's invulnerable, but I'm surprised how much of her outfit survived that explosion. Later, in the Department of Mutagenic Affairs, Graydon tells Forge that he doesn't know about Mystique's motives, like he denies his connection to Gaudier and the Friends of Humanity's violent actions. Now, of course, Forge doesn't believe him, and promises that once he finds enough evidence, Creed and his fear-mongering lot are finished. If only he had, like, a mutant with the power to invent nearly anything, for example, a super stealthy tracking device that can record audio and video of someone without noticing, catching them doing something illegal, and using that to some sort of legal capacity or something. Oh, but I do go on. The bigot vows to gain more political power, purge the genetic aberrations that are destroying the quality of life on this planet, and even enjoying the thought of hanging Forge and X-Factor. Do I need to get into how sad it is that this guy feels relevant in 2023? After he leaves, Rogue and Nightcrawler emerge from a broom closet or something. Forge wants them to hear that conversation to better understand the kind of danger Creed poses. Unless someone burns them to a crisp and people just end up not caring, but what are the odds of that happening? Forge has kept things secret, like the nature of Gaudier's death, because he feels responsible. He tried to help Mystique through her emotional problems, but she betrayed him to access his files on the FOH. Despite that, he's still convinced she can be reached, but only by Rogue and Kurt, though won't elaborate on the elf's role just yet. They need to rendezvous with Mystique, bring her in to stand trial, and avoid other agencies from killing her outright. The X-Men leave so Forge can dramatically stare out the window, pondering if what they'll learn will help turn Raven's life around, or if he's trying to appease his guilt for the death of Rogue's other foster mother, Destiny. I know those disclaimers on Jackass said not to imitate their stunts, but we were bored, we saw some discarded shopping carts in a ravine, and things just unraveled from there. As they fly to their destination, the Southern Belle tells Kurt about meeting Mystique for the first time. Her powers left her friend Cody comatose when he stole a kiss, so Rogue kept away from others until a mysterious woman approached. The girl wielded a shotgun, though didn't really want to hurt anyone, and the woman spoke calmly and sweetly before demonstrating her mutancy by transforming into her default form. For a while, it seemed like Raven truly cared for Rogue, but the nurturing mother facade faded when she had her fight the Avengers, in particular Miss Marvel, at the time Carol Danvers. Upon reaching her childhood home, Rogue leaves Crawler to scout around, meeting up with him later after poking around elsewhere. She's going to be so disappointed when she looks for her favorite childhood rib joint and finds out it burned down. After noting how much Rogue has changed since he was on the main team, Wagner has his own flashback, practicing a routine with his foster sister, Jemaine Zardos, who mentions she sometimes wishes he wasn't her foster brother. Maybe that explains him kissing Rogue's hand. He got all this flirty stuff from Jemaine. Anyway, she wants to leave the circus, see the world, and for Kurt to join her. But he's aware of how he looks and thinks the world isn't ready for a blue fuzzy dude with a tail and fangs. Jemaine tries comforting him, saying plenty of people love him for who he is, that he'll find someone to love him as she does, and the mistake his parents made by leaving him 14 years ago shouldn't dictate his life. You're a teenager. The mistakes you make now should dictate your life. Graydon approaches, having followed the faint radar echo of Rogue's flight, saying the security of the house, a mother's love, it should have been theirs, then drops the brotherly bombshell. Yeah, so I'm moving in a couple days, and I don't want to spring for professionals who are just going to overcharge me for something I could do myself with some help. Hint, hint. I think if that last bubble had been on its own in the next panel, it'd make his dramatic pointing at Kurt look less peculiar. The fuzzy dude ain't buying this, given the source, who starts attacking him, so Creed elaborates. A disguised Mystique married a German count who later died under mysterious circumstances, implying Raven was involved. She gave birth to a blue child with pointed ears, which didn't sit well with the royal family. She made off with the child, but presumably due to inexperience, dropped him near a waterfall and kept running. Leaving baby Kurt at the mercy of scared townsfolk, Creed figures Raven watched him get thrown over the waterfall because she didn't want or love him. Kurt still does not believe this story, figuring he would have died from that fall. In a kind of contradictory statement, Graydon says that nothing human would have lived, but he's more than human. But also less because bigotry. More repulsed by the elf than his own parents, Creed resumes attacking Wagner, intent on making him the first of his family to die. They didn't get on Maury Povich, but they definitely would have made it on Jerry Springer. I'm sure under different circumstances, Kurt would be citing the story of Cain and Abel right about now. Meanwhile, Rogue is dealing with conflicted feelings about how the same woman that was kind to her for so long also beat a man to death with her bare hands. It's his own fault for not eating his vegetables at dinner and staying up past his bedtime. It's called parenting. She's returned to the spot where Cody kissed her, recalling the activation of her powers, when who should show up but Cody. He mentions how many times Rogue had previously visited the swinging rope, replaying the scene with different faces and names for her accidental victim. She's forgiven on behalf of everyone violated by her powers.
You know what happens when I touch somebody. You want to end up in the hospital?
Maybe it's worth it, no?
Rogue knows it's actually Mystique, and really doesn't like this mind game. She asks what made her so special to be chosen so many years ago, leading Mama to say how alike they are. Rogue's powers prevent physical contact, and Raven's metamorphing leaves her unable to be touched on a more interpersonal level, having lost track of her self over time. It doesn't bother her too much, since that means she can't be hurt, but was trying to understand herself better by raising Rogue. She asks if she truly knew Mystique, which angers the blue-skinned ginger, saying Rogue and Destiny were the only people she genuinely felt anything for. That seems inaccurate. Anger and hatred are genuine feelings, and you've had plenty of that to spare for a lot of other folks. Graydon appears with his unconscious, costumed brother in tow. His mom points a gun at him, saying she should have killed him after his 12th birthday arrived, and he showed no signs of mutancy that'd be useful to her, rather than just leaving him to die. Creed says she made a similar error with his step-brother, though I think half-brother would be more accurate. Raven reveals that despite Graydon's sources, she was the one who threw the infant elf over the waterfall, disguised as one of the townspeople, trying to kill him as a matter of self-preservation. I'm sure that admitting that she left one child because he didn't have powers to exploit only makes it more convincing that she actually cared for Rogue, someone she raised who had powers she could exploit. Whether it was the difficult delivery of whom she calls the creature, sheesh, where's my warhammer? Or being pampered as a countess, she accidentally revealed her mutant powers, chased by villagers that saw mother and child as an affront to God. Too weak to fight back, she could either die with her unwanted child, or sacrifice him and live. She says it was no decision, choosing herself, donning the guise of a farmer as the mob caught up, claiming to have tossed the woman to her death, then followed up with the defenseless baby. And you know what? I never regretted it. Not once. Ha! Here's my warhammer! She fires at Graydon, but he teleports away, revealing to have been Nightcrawler using his image inducer and, well, putting Creed in his costume, because that can't be awkward, right? After he takes the gun, Mystique tells Kurt to listen to her. At least she says please. I didn't want you to find out this way. You must believe me. How did you want him to find out? An off-Broadway play? After learning he'd survived, she wanted him to believe his biological mother was a better person than the one she'd become. Now conscious, Graydon hoped Kurt would be so angry at this disclosure that he'd kill their mom, and refuses to let any of them have any kind of happy ending. Rogue doesn't know Creed very well, but figures she could have wound up like him had Mystique not taken her in, suggesting it's not too late for him. Instead, he has an attack chopper piloted by his goon open fire on his family while he hops inside. This is what gets Mystique to rethink Graydon's presumed weakness, as she and Nightcrawler run toward the cliff. Rogue strikes the chopper, but not in time to stop a missile that hits near the swinging tree. You can't drag me back to DC by my throat! I'd like to see her test that theory. Impromptu Mythbusters episode, go! And save my mother and brother from death? No, but she can take you out of the chopper while heading towards the ones in peril. Despite the distance and helicopter blades, somehow Mystique, as she dangles from the swinging rope, heard Gracie, and I guess thinks her daughter can hear her say in her inside voice that Kurt's losing both consciousness and grip on the tree, and Mom's too far away to help. Rogue elects to let Graydon go, and, we get this shot. Is that supposed to be a panty line or some inking detail left in by mistake? Or possibly not mistake. Anyway, the bigot wants to stick around despite the damage to his ride, so he can at least see someone bite the big one. Rogue isn't sure she can save them both. Why not? She's super strong enough to carry two people, and this panel has her right next to Mystique, who's still holding the rope. She could grab Nightcrawler before he falls, while Raven holds on a bit longer to be carried as well. The tension here just doesn't seem to make much sense. In any case, Mama decides to protect Rogue, as always, making the decision for her and letting go of the rope. This selflessness confuses the woozy Wagner, wondering why she did that for him, And again, somehow his softly spoken words were heard by Graydon in the chopper, saying it served Mystique's purpose or some such, and figures Rogue wonders if she'd have made the same call, as his goon flies them away. Okay, seriously, where's he getting this psychoanalysis? The comic ends with Rogue flying her wounded brother to get some help, saying everything will be fine. But Kurt thinks that after what they've learned, things won't be fine for a while. That was X-Men Unlimited number 4, and while I don't think it handled the revelation poorly, I do find myself a tad puzzled by a few things. Just to get this out of the way, I like the art for all its faults. A couple of coloring errors, like a character's lipstick disappearing in between panels, and Rogue's leggings being all green on the last page. But there are so many shots of women's behinds in moments and poses that make it feel so very gratuitous. I don't have a problem with a little cheesecake, particularly if Rogue is involved, but it risks diminishing the tone of the book for the sake of eye candy, and adding fuel to the idea that comics can't be a medium for serious storytelling. For a guy that so viscerally hates mutants, Graydon Creed didn't seem to mind being on a first-name basis with his half-bro, even seems collected around him, wishful about the kind of life they could have had. Almost like deep down he thinks he could have been a better person had Raven not left him. Though it's not like someone can't be calm 1 minute and snap under the right conditions. Bad writing season, fire! But he seemed intent on killing Nightcrawler here, so when it turns out Kurt cleverly used his inducer to get Mystique talking, we assume he overpowered Creed, knocked him out, and swapped their clothes for the ruse. But then Grady Boy mentions wanting Wagner to kill Mystique in a rage, so did he throw that fight assuming Kurt would confront their mother later? If so, that's pretty dependent on a great deal of luck. Well, for him. The only other explanation is that they formed the plan together, and that doesn't work either, because even if you consider that the anti-mutant icon would be willing to collaborate with a mutant if he thought someone would die, why did he attack with deadly ferocity? Why switch clothes when Kurt could just use his inducer and Creed could hide in the shadows or something? It's a fake-out for the reader that's carried out well, until Graydon kind of starts poking holes in it with his assumptions. And he talks like he's studied these X-Men, knows them so well, so confident in anticipating their actions and thoughts. I'm just not sure where that comes from if he thinks a devout guy like Nightcrawler would murder someone in a heartbeat over some unpleasant news. Rogue's impossible choice is hurt by how the scene is presented. She already could have grabbed both of them if Kurt's too dazed to port and they'd be fine. Or heck, taken Creed with her and dropped him nearby first. Mystique's drop was supposed to be more meaningful to Kurt, but it could have been shown more convincingly. As to the overall reveal, this comic builds well on previous events, in particular the Sabretooth mini that sparks Raven's revenge, and even her meeting Crawler in Uncanny X-Men 142. Editor's caption mistakenly says just X-Men, apparently seeding the idea for some connection between the two as far back as the beginning of the Days of Future Past arc. Though I really don't know what Kurt's adoptive mom would know about the finer details of why he washed up on the river. Kinda torn about Raven's back and forth. She seems almost delighted recalling how she may have killed her son to save herself, saying she never second-guessed it, then wants Kurt to listen to how she wanted him to find out some other way. I guess she stalled too long on finding the right note to add to the cookie bouquet. For someone that mentions not letting people get close, not treating friends well, I have to wonder why she would care so much what he thought about his biological mom. Any contriteness on her part that the writer might have intended didn't really come across very clearly to me. Or perhaps we're supposed to chalk this up to her not knowing herself. Kurt is understandably confused by all this, but given no time to process it. Whether or not he sought some religious guidance maybe was covered in another title later on. But he got confirmation under optimal circumstances, if you ask me, and Forge apparently knew somehow, so he could confirm it. In the middle of all this is Rogue, finding out that she has more personal connections to a hateful man she barely knows and a longtime friend and ally, further complicated by Mystique's involvement. I haven't read every X-Men comic even from this point on, but in those that I have, I don't recall this newfound siblingship expanded upon. Maybe it's meant to be unspoken, or they didn't want to change the relationship they already had, or it got brought up in a comic I didn't read. An episode of X-Men Evolution addresses it, mildly so. Yet I doubt if this story could be told without our Southern Belle, if only because at the heart of it is how one mother treated 3 different kids. One she willingly sacrificed, another she abandoned for not measuring up, and a third adopted, claiming it was to better understand herself, but she did kind of exploit her powers, which is more consistent with her previous actions. I'm just curious if these are intentional questions because of Mystique's personality, based in the nature of her powers and experience with humanity, or an excuse to overlook plot holes. If I had to choose, I'd say the X-Men episode Bloodlines does a better job with the premise. I'm iffy about comparing 2 mediums. As I said in my Return of the Joker review, a talented and skilled performer can convey emotional nuance in a more straightforward way than ink and paper. But the comic has a lot more established stories and characterizations to deal with. In the cartoon, Nightcrawler only appeared a couple of times, not having quite the same connection to members of the team as in the comics, so there's not as much need for him to be quoting scripture or the like, really cementing his personality. Though Bloodlines did give us a more contrite, near-sympathetic Mystique, and a more sacrificial moment. I doubt anyone expected her to die on our Saturday morning cartoon show, but taking the shot, being injured, and falling over gives more weight to the idea of her in danger, as opposed to letting go of a rope. Even if Darkholme is limited to changing into humanoid forms, I feel she has a lot of options to save herself from serious harm in this situation, so this doesn't feel quite so epic to me. This comic is not bad. It's a fun read, if a bit wordy for exposition's sake, and the art lends itself to so much cheesecake it can feel a bit much. It's well paced, it has very clever moments, and some emotional weight for our characters. I just think Bloodlines improves on the premise. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.